The National Weather Service.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
And good evening, everyone. It's the 11th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your community and village by going to weather.gov/Alaska or using Marine VHF or your NOAA weather radio. You can also call into the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. In the afternoons, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing. And because we started things just a little bit out of order, I didn't say hello. I'm Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Hopefully you are having a good afternoon and a good evening, and let's get right to it. Here's a look at the Copper River Basin. A winter weather advisory continues until 6 o'clock tonight. As that expires around that point, we're expecting that the snow that may still be falling is diminishing at this point, and we're expecting that when we hear back from you with stormfall totals, and we would love to hear that, give us a call or use the web form to give us a storm report there. We always appreciate that. We expect that totals will be around 5 to 9 inches or so by the time it's all said and done. Now, for many areas in southeast, you've had winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings, high wind warnings. Right now, things are all clear there, but you know, it's just Wednesday, so we'll see what happens on Thursday. Right now, no watches, warnings, or advisories in southeast. To look up north, that is not the case for you. Wind chill advisories are posted now for many areas in the northwestern Brooks Range, the coastal plain, all the way toward the Arctic coast, from west to east in the Beaufort Seacoast, and for the Chukchi Seacoast north of Kivalina. Now, just yesterday we were talking about wind chill warnings and values that could be as cold as 65 below. That's not the case now. We're thinking that's going to be a little bit closer to as low as 55. And while that is still dangerously cold, and especially if you have to be outside for just a matter of time, a few minutes or so, will do some big damage to your skin, as you well know. 55 is a lot better than 65 below. So, okay. So a technicality more or less, but in this case we're going to call it a wind chill advisory, and that covers coast to coast from the west to the east along the Arctic there and the northwestern Brooks Range, and generally north of Kivalina for the Kotzebue Sound region. Most of these areas are going to be under this advisory or this level of warning, let's say, until about noon tomorrow, maybe a little bit longer into the afternoon for some of the eastern areas, so let's keep watch on that. Now out across the Pribilofs, a winter weather advisory is posted for you. What does that mean? In this case, it's for blowing snow. So winds plus the transportable snow or snow that's lifted up, not necessarily the snow that's falling, but there will be some of that too. Probably going to be blowing around and reducing visibility to under 1/2 mile. That starts at 9 o'clock tonight and lasts into tomorrow. So plan on some deteriorating conditions as we head through the evening hours for the Pribilofs, including St. Paul and St. George. Now, out to the west, what's going on with the Pribilofs? Northeasterly flow is picking up a little bit more. Why? Low pressure across the western Gulf is dragging that northeasterly flow in just a little bit more. There's moisture moving in as well, so not only do you get snow and probably some more wind, but that of course means blowing snow for the Pribilofs. For many areas in the Aleutians, in fact, pretty much well-defined northerly flow will continue into tomorrow and the next day as that low pressure system sits in the south and high pressure sits in the north. It's just a conveyor belt of cold for you. Don't look for a whole lot of changes there as we go through the rest of the week. Maybe some minor fluctuations from north to northeast to northwest, but all in all, pretty much a northerly flow is what you get there. Out across the west, you can see some tropical moisture working its way northward, but most of that is going to stay far to the west at this point, as don't see much of a pattern change. Out across southeast, you get a little bit of a cloud cover breaking free earlier today. The sun probably popped out in a few spots, and you can see clearing was taking place there south of Whitehorse to Yakutat. But then south of Sitka, clouds were filling back in right away, and another wave of low pressure rotating under the upper level system that is keeping storm systems kind of circulating in this general fashion. Because it is backed up just a little bit to the west, that's giving more places in south central and southeast a taste of some warmer weather, a taste of some wetter air, and some of that is also making its way over the Brooks Range. So as you look at the surface charts here in a minute, you're going to start to see some more areas that are getting a little bit more opportunities for precipitation and maybe even snowfall, but let's not get your hopes up just yet. Most areas are still well below normal, especially in south central and southwest and the west as far as snow depth goes for the season. Quite an interesting season it's been. So as you look up north, not a whole lot going on across the west. We've got the wind to make it feel colder, but not a whole lot of snow falling in that region, so relatively quiet there. Areas of fog there to accompany the cold across the Arctic coast today. Low pressure sitting just outside of Prince William Sound at 989 millibars. Still making it snow in the Copper River Basin, and remember that winter weather advisory will go for about another 20 minutes or so. The frontal boundaries kind of falling apart across the eastern Gulf, but here's that next surge already bringing the clouds up the eastern Gulf. That's at 992 millibars, a little bit warmer with that. That means a better chance of rain for southeast. Look for some light snow to continue across southwestern Alaska tonight. A better chance for some light snow to develop around the Pribilofs. Again, some of that could bring in some poor visibility with that, and blowing and drifting snow is possible. We'll call that a winter weather advisory for snow. Tonight's forecast keeps things fairly quiet across the Arctic coast. There may be some pockets of blowing and drifting snow there, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Look for snow showers across parts of the interior, most likely around the Copper River Basin and northward. You may see some light accumulations there. Snow showers possible around parts of south central Alaska. Coastal areas much more likely to see a rain and snow mix as temperatures have been warming up. Light snow accumulations for southwest, including areas around Bethel, southward toward King Salmon, maybe a rain-snow mix. The Alaska Peninsula, generally rainfall. Around the Aleutian Range, you might pick up a little bit of rain and snow there. That trend continues into Thursday as low pressure snakes its way back up the north and eastern Gulf Coast. Periods of rain for southeast should be expected. Rain and snow perhaps from Yakutat westward into Prince William Sound, parts of the Kenai Peninsula, especially along the Cook Inlet, and snow showers for areas along the middle Yukon Valley around Norton Sound. A chance for some light snow there, generally toward the north and maybe even around Nome there. That would be an interesting sight for you. Haven't seen a whole lot of that make its way a whole lot further northward in the last couple weeks. Low pressure south of False Pass and Cold Bay at 986 millibars. Still got enough cold to produce snow and blowing snow for the Pribilofs, but just around the central and eastern Aleutians, chances are you're going to see that mix in with some rainfall there. By Friday, low pressure still working its way northward, and it's still bringing in warm air for southeast. Look for periods of rain for Prince William Sound, and things should start to dry up around the Cook Inlet region and westward. Some breaks in the clouds there if you need to make it through Windy or Rainy Pass or Lake Clark or Merrill Pass. Some pockets of snow showers across the upper Yukon Valley, across the Alcan into Yukon itself. Periods of blowing snow for the Arctic coast, snow showers and blowing snow for St. Lawrence Island southward to St. Matthew, into the Pribilofs there. And look for periods of rain and snow around southwestern Alaska and pockets of rainfall from Kodiak Island westward into the Alaska Peninsula itself. Temps today have been in the 30s and 40s and warming up in southeast. Areas around Haines and Skagway still a little bit cooler. 41 around Yakutat, 20s and 30s for Prince William Sound, raining in Cordova, and snow in Valdez. Same old story, right? Cook Inlet looking at temperatures from the lower 30s to nearly 40 degrees around Homer this afternoon. 9 in the Matanuska Glacier, 3 around Glen Allen and Golcana, 30 around Skwetna this afternoon, 4 in Healy, 7 in Fort Greeley, and 9 in Fairbanks, above 0, so you know it's getting warm now. 5 below around Eagle, 2 below in Fort Yukon, and temperatures north of the Brooks Range still showing winter in full effect, anywhere from 15 to 30 below there. Kotzebue and Kivalina looking at temperatures that were sub-zero. Kivalina colder at 17 below, 10 above in Nome. Unalakleet was up to 9. Looked like Grayling showing 5, 1 below in McGrath, and temperatures around Bethel at 6 above. Nunivak Island was 9. Southwestern Alaska into Bristol Bay, 20s and 30s there. Dillingham and King Salmon saw a warm up with King Salmon the winter at 34, and 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula with Sandpoint at 45, 35 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Pribilofs in the upper teens and low 20s today, and above freezing from Attu eastward toward Adak and Atka. Overnight lows south of the Alaska Range will hold in the 20s and low 30s, about 34 in Kodiak, 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula and the chain, 30s and 40s for southeast, the interior, middle Tanana Valley especially, 5 to 10 below. And north of the Brooks Range, still looking at 20 to 30 below there. Nome about 3 below. High temperatures for you tomorrow are expected to continue to be mild. 12 there in Nome, 17 below, though, for Barrow. And again, a little bit of wind makes a big difference in that feels-like index, so be careful out there. Teens and 20s for the interior, especially the Tanana Valley. Southward into the Susitna Valley, 32 there. South of that, temperatures could go above freezing for Anchorage, Matsu, looks like Homer and Seward. Prince William Sound, 41 in Kodiak, and 30s and 40s continue for southeastern Alaska. On to flying weather now, a wide swath of IFR from the YK Delta south into the central Aleutians. A little bit of a break there north of the Bering Sea coast for the Alaska Peninsula. Pockets of IFR for the Alaska Range in the west and around Portage Valley up toward almost Valdez there. Otherwise, MVFR for a wide area of southeastern Alaska, the Gulf Coast, and some pockets in the middle and upper Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley, especially north of Fairbanks. You're looking at IFR conditions there. Here's your pass conditions. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, we expect to see some improvements during the day, heading for VFR conditions throughout your Thursday. As far as Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect some snow showers in the region at least. So we're going to start at IFR, probably looking for some improvements in the ceiling during the day. The same goes for Rainy Pass on your Thursday. Windy Pass marginal through most of the day. It's going to be a little sketchy there. MVFR probably to start, maybe some improvements. Isabel Pass likely starts around instrument flight rule. Mentasta Pass, similar conditions. Scattered snow showers will be in the region. Tanita Pass, we're going to say, okay, give it a shot. VFR conditions there for Thursday. And Portage Pass, we expect to see IFR with snow showers most likely in the region in the morning and maybe some lifting during the afternoon, mixing it with rain too. Have fun with that. Chilkoot and White Pass also looking at more rain in the region and maybe some snow at elevation. So again, watch for some improvements during the day, but probably starting at IFR. Cold still winning the continental parts of Alaska there as you get offshore. That surface freezing line's just north of the peninsula and the chain. But you can see the warmth building back into the Gulf, 2, 4, 6, and even 8,000-foot freezing levels out over the central and eastern Gulf. And another surge of warm air continues working northward. With that comes some moisture, so we have more icing to report. Looks like a lot of that will be across western Alaska with the best chance for occasional moderate, mainly across the northern parts of the YK, Norton Sound, and into the Koyukuk and Noatak valleys there, generally north of the Yukon Valley. Out across the central chain, above 2,000 feet, above 4,000 feet for the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. And a lot of this is going to be on the move in a counterclockwise fashion, so probably starting a little bit over here in the morning and then kind of shifting around from right to left. So plan on some changes there during the day, above 6,000 feet when you get north of the Alaska Range and out of the Copper River Basin there. As far as the jet goes, no major change here. We still have a very pronounced dip in the jet stream across the Pacific and then a pronounced lifting from south to north. That's bringing in that warm and wet air across southeastern Alaska, now more of the Gulf as we just saw. And we also have a south and westerly flow coming up out of Alaska that's pushing a lot of that cold a little bit further into the heart of Canada. In the meantime, now 9,000 feet, we've got our southerly flow back across the Gulf. 45 to 50 knot winds are coming in due south. Winds diminish greatly across the Yukon Valley as they become more east and northeasterly over the Bering Strait and then drop southward. And that's where all of our friends out in the Aleutians are getting that due north wind at the surface. Boy, it is just driving southward and giving you a taste of the Arctic for sure. South and easterly flow, a little bit more across the Gulf in this case at 3,000 feet, 35 to 40 knot winds. Similar conditions there for southeast. Winds are still fairly light across the interior of the Chukchi Seacoast as well as Kotzebue Sound, looking at light winds around 5 to 15 knots and 20 to 30 knot winds also from the north coming through the Aleutians with low pressure just south of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor in the Pacific. Turbulence then is going to focus on southeast below 6,000 feet generally across most of the inner waterways and the coastal areas as that frontal boundary is just hovering in the region, so expect some chop there. And then light to isolated moderate across the Arctic coast as we saw with some of the tight pressure gradient setup there, as well as areas around St. Lawrence Island and southward into the central and western chain, maybe, just maybe, around the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, also below 4,000 feet. Let's look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with an update on the sea ice edge in the Bering and, of course, your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Weather balloons here at Fairbanks International Airport are released by the Weather Service twice a day, and the timing of those releases are such that they are coordinated with all the other releases around the world. And that data then, which provides a vertical profile of temperature and relative humidity and pressure in the atmosphere, is then integrated into the forecast models run by the by the Weather Service.
How can you forecast the temperatures when an inversion is present? It is a difficult puzzle. In Fairbanks, often the weather forecast says today, clear skies, high temperatures from 20 below to 10 above, coldest in the valley and mildest in the hills, a 30-degree range. This is not uncommon in the interior winter. It's a difficult puzzle to try to put very precise numbers. We need a broad range because within that shallow layer, you go from such cold temperatures to such warm temperatures. That's just the way it is here in the inhabited elevations of interior Alaska. Well, anything you want to forecast, including a temperature inversion, has to be studied. You have to learn how the inversion works in order to forecast its future behavior. And part of learning how it works involves gathering data. And every day out at the Fairbanks International Airport, a weather balloon is launched. On the end of the balloon is a thermometer, up it goes, and we get the vertical profile of temperature in the atmosphere. And that's real good data. You can see the inversion with that. Problem is, the weather balloon only goes up twice a day. And for forecasting, detecting and forecasting the jet stream, which operates on broad spatial and temporal scales, twice a day is for most purposes adequate. However, down here in this fine spatial scale right in urban Fairbanks, we need more than twice a day to really understand the inversion, especially its formation and its dissipation.
So the weather balloons that are released at Fairbanks International are timed with all those other global releases, and they are not actually at times which are very dynamically active here in Fairbanks, which is another reason that we're interested in doing this experiment with an aircraft and also additional weather balloon releases to sample some of those more dynamically active times of the day.
Basically, in preparing the sondes, you have to take the sonde out of the package, prepare the sensors, and then you'll fill up the weather balloon, then need to calibrate the instrument inside. So that's the most important part of balloon preparation. So when we're calibrating the instrument, we make sure that the temperature of the sensor is realistic with the temperature either of the room or outside, wherever the sonde is being calibrated, as well as pressure, making sure that's at our level, and also the relative humidity, that looks realistic. We use these weather balloons that when they're filled up with helium, they're approximately 6 feet wide. And by the time that they reach the top of the atmosphere where the balloon pops, they're about 20 feet wide. So they're huge. It's hard to even imagine. After we get clearance from the FAA, we'll go outside, take the radio sonde, attach it to the balloon, and then make sure there aren't any planes going by just in case, and let her go. And the computer inside actually picks up the signal automatically. It'll tell you exactly when the balloon was launched, and the data will come processing in from there. After we launch the balloon, I'll go back inside the building and to make sure that the data that's coming in on the computer looks realistic, making sure the pressure decreases with height, the relative humidities look realistic, and in my cases, looking at temperature inversion, that the temperature is increasing with height. Typically in the atmosphere, we see temperature decreasing with height, but in these special cases, that's what I'm looking for. And then I can watch as the temperature progresses vertically into the atmosphere, as that sensor's rising, and I can see where the top of the inversion layer is. So the National Weather Service currently launches weather balloons twice a day, but I wanted to launch weather balloons more frequently than that to see what was happening between those launches. So I wanted to take a look at what's happening between that 4 p.m. launch and that 4 a.m. launch, and then what's happening between the 4 a.m. and the 4 p.m. So I launched these weather balloons every 2 to 3 hours to gain a better temporal resolution of what's going on in the atmosphere.
Our research asked the question, what will surface-based temperature inversions look like in Alaska over the next 100 years? And the primary tool for studying future projections are global climate models. In fact, they're the only tool. But they're not perfect for answering our question because we're interested in information over a city landscape scale, which is a few miles, 5 miles, 10 miles. Global climate models provide information on a 100-mile scale. So we need to get that information from this coarse scale and downscale it to a higher resolution so it's useful for us. And the way we do that is we take climate information from the global climate model and we feed it into our regional model, which has a domain over Alaska, at a resolution of, say, a few miles instead of hundreds of miles. And the large-scale climate comes from these global climate models, and then we run our simulation over Alaska. We have done regional downscaling simulations for 20 years in the 20th century, from 1979 to 1999. We've done 10 years from 2010 to 2019, and then from 2050 to 2059, and 2090 to 2099. So with the regional model, we've taken these 4 slices over time, fed by the global climate model. And what we find, first of all, in the 20th century simulation is that the regional model does a much better job of simulating the vertical surface-based temperature inversions over Fairbanks and the other cities in Alaska. And as we go through the 21st century, those 3 other slices, as the global climate warms, we find that the temperature inversions in the lowest layer don't really change in strength. The strength stays the same, but the whole profile gets warmer. So this study provides a first look at what would be happening to temperature inversions in the future. We need to ask other questions like, how will this frequency change? Will they occur as often? Will the season be much shorter? There's a variety of other questions we need to ask to develop a better picture for how temperature inversions will change in the future. And our first cut answer that we have suggests that we'll still have to worry about the same sort of air quality issues, because in the near surface, the strength of the inversion will be about the same.
All right, as we look out toward the Bering Sea, you'll notice that ice edge and at least the leading edge of the strips of ice are starting to approach St. Paul there and filling in a little bit more south and west of the Kuskokwim Delta region. As we zoom in on that a little bit more, there's still about 15 to 20 nautical miles, I think, from St. Paul to some of the leading edges of where we've analyzed a higher concentration of those strips. But once again, the main ice pack is still back about 5 to 10 nautical miles. Will it advance a whole lot more this week? We'll have to see there. A lot of warmer air is trying to build in, but we also have that northerly flow west of the Pribilof, so we'll have to see how this changes. Stay up to date with the latest changes from our Sea Ice Desk analysis team there, weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. For southeast, looks like rain for you. A little bit better chance for warmer weather in the coming days there with a south and easterly flow, especially along the coast. There's going to be some higher gusts, especially around Cross Sound. Northerlies, though, taming down a little bit in the Lynn Canal, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southeast winds are up to 30 knots with 6 to 9-foot seas in Clarence Strait. By Friday, you can see not a whole lot of change there. The Lynn Canal winds switch around to a southerly flow at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Coastal winds 25 to 30 knots with 9 to as high as 16-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance. For south central, northeasterlies around Prince William Sound with a 3-foot sea. Also looking at a northeast flow coming down Cook Inlet. 3-foot seas in the ice-free waters there across the northern end. The ice has been extending south of the island there and south of Kenai. Northeasterlies west of the Barrens up to 20 knots with an east and southeast flow over Kodiak Island around 15 knots. 3-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, much better than the other day. And northwesterlies come in on Friday with a 3-foot sea. Northerlies still going strong across the north and western Gulf. Inside of Prince William Sound, we're still talking about northeasterly winds coming up a little bit more to 20 knots with a 4-foot sea on Friday. For the Alaska Peninsula region, an east and southeast flow across the region from Castle Cape to Chignik. That's 25 knots with a 10-foot sea. Easterlies over the ice inside of Bristol Bay at 20 knots. For Friday, northeasterlies there. East wind on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, south and west of Port Heiden with a 5-foot sea down toward Cold Bay. And east and southeasterly winds on the Pacific side with 8 to 9-foot seas on Friday. For the Aleutians, there's our northerly wind, their good friend there for Atka and Adak. Probably not. 25-knot winds there from the north with a 14-foot sea. North and easterlies north and south of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. 7-foot seas on the Pacific side. Out around Kiska and Attu, that's 9 to 11-foot seas with a north and northeasterly wind 20 to 30 knots. That diminishes a little bit on Friday, becoming a little more northerly with time, and we get northwesterlies on the Pacific side of Unalaska and Nikolsky with 20 knots there, 7-foot seas, and 9-foot seas coming in from the north with a 25-knot wind into Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and Nikolsky on Friday. For the west coast, northerlies rule the day once again over the ice. That's 25 to 30 knots around St. Paul and St. George. A northerly wind at 35 knots with an 11-foot sea. By Friday, a little bit of a north and easterly shift closer to the coast. We'll keep winds from the north around St. Paul and St. George with an 8-foot sea. Northeasterlies around the St. Matthew Island waters and the ice-free areas. That's up to 9 feet there, especially west and south. Across the Arctic coast, east and northeast winds for the Beaufort Sea coast and the northern Arctic coast at 25 knots. 15 to 25 knots there around Wainwright to Point Lay, and north and easterly winds coming around the Chukchi Sea coast from Cape Lisburne southward. 20 knots just outside of Kotzebue Sound. We'll see those winds stay about the same there from Kivalina westward. Northeasterlies around Cape Lisburne up to 30 knots, and east and northeasterly winds still running around 15 to as high as 25 knots for the northern coast areas. Winds diminish a little bit there for Kaktovik and the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, so maybe things are getting a little bit better there, at least not as windy. Here's a recap of the weather that we're expecting tonight. There may be some light snow showers across south central Alaska. We're looking for the eastern Gulf to produce another wave of low pressure, bringing in a little bit more southerly flow across southeast. That means periods of rain for you, snow for higher elevations like Chilkoot and White Pass, as well as the Alaska Range, and parts across the YK Delta may see some light accumulations of snow. As we get into tomorrow, wind chill advisories continue through tonight and tomorrow morning for the northern Arctic coast and north of Kivalina. Watch for those values to be as cold as 55 below. Winter weather advisory should be expiring for the Copper River Basin tonight. As we go ahead into Friday, notice we are still looking for some active weather in the east and across the west with winter weather advisories for the Pribilofs as well. Stay safe.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.